Hi everyone, welcome to this issue of SpeakComms. Matt, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about the Longman by-election, particularly the Super Saturday by-elections that occurred across Australia, where we saw a whole lot of politicians talk about a whole lot of things. In Longman in particular, we looked at a Conservative candidate who had admitted to publicising that he'd been awarded a certain type of military medal when he hadn't. It was accepted in a Galaxy poll by more than 70% of respondents that he'd either just stuffed up or he'd made an honest error. But yet he was the hot favourite to win. Now he didn't win. He didn't actually make the election.
And it had some effect though, didn't it? I think in the long run it had an effect. People started to question.
But that brings us to the real question today. We're talking about authenticity. What is it? Why is it important to us? Does it matter?
Well, authenticity, particularly for politicians, it's the thing that we look for, isn't it? It's the thing that politicians are at pains to demonstrate, that they are authentic, that they're like us. It's a little bit hard to believe when you have a Prime Minister who's a multi-millionaire trying to pretend that he's like us and carries around on a train or a tram. Really?
What about the democracy sausage? I mean, how do you eat the democracy sausage?
Yeah, no idea. Yeah, any number of politicians in a pub trying to drink a beer like an ordinary bloke. No, sorry, that's not authentic. But where do we see authenticity first coming from? Well, look, there's a lot of theory and a lot of philosophy on authenticity that comes from early modern times onwards. Some really useful theory on authenticity comes from Lionel Trilling, who was a social theorist and literary critic. He was writing in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And he argues in sort of stepping through this genealogy of authenticity as an idea, or as a psychology. He calls this a social psychology. He says that we see a fundamental change in the way that human beings interact with each other and how they derive their moral compass from the early modern period. So this is around the late 1500s, 1600s or thereabouts. The time of Shakespeare, we might colloquially say here, the early modern period. He said that people shifted from having a concern for sincerity as their driving moral compass to authenticity. Now, why is this? What was going on during this time that caused Trilling to sort of make this argument? He said the diminution of the church, particularly, as the sole authority in society, but also to the rise of the city. So we have cities that we now understand, as we now understand them, starting to form in this period as well. Now what happens in cities, Trilling argues, and this borrows a little bit from the theory of Irving Goffman, one of Trilling's contemporaries, but also Georges Simmel, who was a sociologist from a little bit before. Interesting that these three guys all were saying much the same thing here. But what happens in cities is that people need to try on different faces in different contexts. So because of the bombardment, the sensory bombardment and the interpersonal bombardment of the city, we are playing different parts in different parts of the city all the time. We might be who we are at home, but when we're out in public we have to play the part. And this is what Trilling says necessitated this shift to authenticity.
Yep.
What we're now looking for in each other is the authentic self. Not the part being played, but who the true person is. Now Trilling says, and he draws on Shakespeare, in fact Hamlet, to make this case, where Polonius says in Act 1, Scene 3, no less, he says, "To thyself be true." To be true to oneself. Now, how many times have you heard a sports person in an interview after a sporting event sort of say, "I was just trying to be true to myself, man"? Yeah, okay, great. This is where this comes from. And Trilling argues that this is the key aspect of authenticity, to be true to oneself or to aspire to that. Now, how successful we are in actually achieving that, I'm not sure. But this is what we see with politicians. This sense or this artifice of trying to be true to oneself at the same time I'm trying to convince you that I'm just like you. Yes. I'm authentic.
And I can be just like you to many people.
Depending on who you are.
Where I am.
Which blows authenticity out of the water, but it's this artifice again.
And it's one of those things, as I was making my notes about this last night, one of the questions I was going to throw at you was to say that if I'm an actor and I authentically portray a role, they give me awards. If I'm just me and I'm authentically portraying a certain persona, I'm duplicitous.
Yes, that's right. I'm not thinking here Leonardo DiCaprio with anything he's ever done ever. They'll get us in trouble.
hear any applause for Leonardo at all out there.